Absolutely. Thank you. So I'll invite the next three panelists onto the stage here. Please. And we'll share the mic and get along really well. So while the previous panel were two representatives, legends from the industry, right, GE and IBM. What we have in this panel are the doers from the region here, right? So from the region here, we have Dr. Mary Lou Baisi, who's the Senior Medical Director from Highmark. We have Dr. Adrian Lee, who's the Director of Institution for Precision Medicine here at the University of Pittsburgh. And we have Dr. Nizar Zein, who's the Chairman and Medical Director of Global Patient Services at the Cleveland Clinic. And the Cleveland Clinic, as many of you know, are doing some remarkable things internationally and specifically so in the Middle East as well. So I'll just very quickly set the stage, and then we'll jump straight into some rapid-fire questions, and we'll also then open it up to the audience, right? So you heard from the industry. There's massive transformation that's going on in the industry and healthcare at large. We're leveraging technology not as an impediment, but really as an enabler to transform care processes. We're leveraging cloud and machine learning. But what's interesting too is we're seeing real healthcare being transformed. When you talk about real healthcare, we have real issues to deal with, whether it's here in Western Pennsylvania and Ohio, or whether it's in the Middle East, we're dealing with real issues like chronic diseases. At the same time, we're seeing massive healthcare changes coming with things like precision medicine, right? In chronic diseases, in the United States, it's the leading cause of death. And we know that this is true internationally as well. Massive concern and cost escalation as a result of heart disease and as a result of diabetes, as was discussed earlier this morning as well. So how do we reimagine care? How do we bring in the specifics of precision medicine to really take care to the next level? I know we have remarkable examples of how each of my panelists here are doing work towards that notion. So let me start on the far right with Dr. Lee, Adrian. President Barack Obama was in town last week here in Pittsburgh, for those of you who didn't know. We had a remarkable time over a day where, some of the greatest innovators from across the United States came in to showcase how we were transforming the frontiers across multiple different areas. He's also a great supporter of precision medicine and the cancer moonshot, right? So can you briefly describe the event and the outcomes so that we can all sort of understand where things are?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting event. So the White House had a meeting called Frontiers, which is their first time to really promote the initiatives that President Obama has had in the last 2 years. And he funded a number of initiatives. One is the Brain Initiative, one is the Precision Medicine Initiative, there's a Space Initiative, getting to Mars. And so Frontiers came here to host a meeting with 5 tracks: precision medicine, brain, and several others in space, and one in the environment. It was held here. We were very proud to hold it in Pittsburgh. It was held in Pittsburgh because of the strengths from the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon and the development and industries and healthcare transformation that's occurred in the city. I sat in on the precision medicine track, which probably is the same one that Rasu sat in on. And it was very interesting. There was some talk about the precision medicine cohort, which the NIH is now funded to collect biosamples and phenotype data on 1 million individuals. That's wearable data, pretty much future capture of all this data on patients. That will be then made publicly available as a resource for academics to do research on. One of the reasons it was here was because Pittsburgh competed for that and is now one of those institutions. So we will collect data on 175,000 individuals from Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania and provide that to the cohort. The other thing that came up, which was mentioned on this last panel, was this idea of enabling data. It came up a lot, this idea of why don't patients have their own data, this idea that there should be patient-centric data rather than institutional-centric data. And there was a lot of discussion about how that sounds great, but the challenges that would provide, and various patients gave their perspectives on that. But it was a very exciting event. I sat next to the owner of a company called Planet, which can now image the whole of the Earth every day. Within 24 hours, they can take an image of the whole of the Earth every 24 hours now. It was really, really remarkable. And I think I think what President Obama has said, he said this with the Precision Medicine Initiative, this is the time to implement these things. We have, this was mentioned right in this last panel, we have all the tools. It's really what are the, breaking down these impediments to now making that happen.
That's great. And, we're thankful to the President for bringing the focus to the Pittsburgh region here. And Mary Lou, let me ask you a question. As we're seeing this massive transformation that we talked about in the industry, there's this movement from just managing disease, right, to really managing the person. Right, precision medicine and personalized care. It's not a sledgehammer approach to disease management as we've been doing in the last couple of decades, couple of centuries even. It's really looking at the N of one, which is the person, and personalized and precision medicine. So what's the role of a managed care organization like Highmark in the era of personalized medicine?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Thank you. I think I have
Lavalier.
Okay.
All right, excellent.
Sorry.
How come we don't get one?
Let's take a step back.
Yep.
Managed care companies are different from insurance companies in that managed care does both care management and also is payer. And in that role, they do have a remarkable, can you all hear me? They do have a remarkable ability to transform the practice of medicine. Actually, health plans have been practicing, as we heard in the previous section, they've actually invented population health. It wasn't called that, but they've invented it because they've traditionally taken care of specific populations for which they are the payer. And as the payer, they design both the benefits of the product that you buy, the health insurance, and they also have a network of doctors and hospitals that provide the care. And within that, they have their own mechanisms for managing care. As we move into more a sophisticated, evidence-based approach to disease, so for example, not all cancer is alike. We know, for example, for breast cancer, there's several different types. Some are much more aggressive than others. We know there's probably multiple genes, although we haven't identified them all, that cause breast cancer. Not everybody with diabetes, but even the type 2 diabetes has the same condition. There's probably many, many different genotypes, as well as lifestyle issues that affect how diabetes is both acquired and expressed, and what medications they respond to. So for example, a common disease like arthritis, if you take medicine for arthritis, less than half of the people who take medication are going to actually respond to it in a positive way. For diabetes, asthma, depression, only about 40% of people respond to traditional medicine. Yet as a practicing physician, somebody who did primary care for 25 years, I always thought my patients with asthma and diabetes and depression would all respond, but that's not really what we're finding out with this era of precision medicine. We're finding out there are really distinct subpopulations. I think breast cancer has a lot of examples of that, where either the hormone status of the tumor or the other receptor status can dictate therapy, and therapy for diseases that were once killers have now become chronic diseases. I mean, in our lifetimes, AIDS and cancer and even heart disease to a large extent have become a chronic disease, as opposed to what were, largely, if you got it, you expected to die within a few months.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think promoting evidence-based medicine is one of the things that health plans have done well.
Yeah.
And I think certainly having an approach to population health and a long tradition of that also is unique among the payers.
Absolutely, and propagating that at scale, right? So that's remarkable. So we talked about chronic diseases, and the statistics speak for themselves. In the United States, 7 out of 10 deaths in the United States can be attributable to a chronic disease. 1 out of 2 adults in the United States has at least one chronic illness. And Dr. Zein, you've seen this globally and also in the Middle East, where this is a remarkable force that needs to be comprehended as we're looking at healthcare transformation. So the question to you is, how does what we're seeing in the United States translate to what's happening in the Middle East region?
So I think it's not too dissimilar than the United States. For one thing, the Middle East is a lot. If you take the Middle East as a larger region, it's not uniform. So there are places still struggle with infant mortality, with mothers' death around the delivery, and then they struggle with diarrheal illnesses and so on. But I think the Middle East we are most focused on today has been the GCC region. And in that region, they have been able to overcome these basic medical needs, and they now struggle with the same issue that we struggle with here in the United States. So obesity, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and so on is the #1 killer in that region. We did a study about 2 or 3 years ago in Abu Dhabi looking at these metabolic syndrome factors. And if you look at obesity, is prevalent in over 75% of the population over the age of 50. And if you look at morbid obesity, certainly more than 40 or 45% population. Diabetes exceeds the rates that we see here in the United States. So they have the same issues that we do, and I think they have the same issues, but then the issue of precision medicine and the role of genetic factors, the role of environmental factors may play differently in each region of the world, and that's where these all come together.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Yeah. So clearly, precision medicine has a key role in looking at individual variability in genes and environment and lifestyle for that N of 1 that we're talking about. Back to you, Adrian, Dr. Lee. You're the director of the Institution for Precision Medicine at Pitt and UPMC. Can you describe some of what's going on in that institution and some of the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, so at the Institute, I think the first 3 major goals. I think the first one is dissemination of knowledge. As you said, we have, so much going on, and we're in a very fast, rapid time in terms of transfer of knowledge to try and bring together all the parts that go on in precision medicine at the University of Pittsburgh and at UPMC to try and disseminate that properly. The second one associated with that is then strategic vision to make sure that the kind of goals are aligned so we can reach that end goal. And then it comes to actually the research, which is probably the most key part. One of them was mentioned earlier, pharmacogenomics. That's a relatively low-hanging fruit for precision medicine. We've been doing this with clopidogrel and with cardiac stents. We've now genotyped 590 individuals and have very intriguing results like others do. And I think the value is going to be apparent for that, and that's going to be moved rapidly into mainstream usage. I think we work a lot on data, on big data. So we have a large machine learning program, a large causal modeling program, looking at ways, as you heard from the last 2 presenters, to try and kind of improve our understanding of healthcare. The final one is commercialization, trying to make value out of that to keep this whole ball rolling. As an example, I mean, you could pick many examples of what Pitt and UPMC have done, but just take one that came up this morning. The University of Pittsburgh last year entered an agreement with Shire Pharmaceuticals, which is one of the largest generator of orphan drugs. And so in the Middle East, you have this, overrepresentation of these genetic diseases, as was said. And so there are these opportunities. There are actually more people with those types of genetic diseases than there are, for instance, with cancer. So it's a large market that's kind of untapped by the large pharmaceutical companies, but these smaller ones can actually target these orphan drugs and orphan diseases. So there's a tremendous amount of kind of basic science being translated into clinical care.
That's remarkable, marrying the sort of the phenotypic and genotypic data. What's interesting about all of this is we're talking about the Middle East and what's going on in the United States and trying to build bridges across the two areas, is the pace of change, the pace of innovation, right? And how remarkably that's sort of transforming some of the specifics of what we're doing around precision medicine. Dr. Baisi, a question for you. As we're looking at this rapid pace that we're talking about, science tends to run ahead of managed care's medical policies sometimes, right? So it's sort of the race. Do you see a potential tension here?
Well, I think there's a tension already. I think that there's always a tension between leading edge scientists and practitioners who want to take the latest scientific advances and bring them to the marketplace, and the Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the desire of the managed care organization to make sure that the particular treatment is going to be effective and that there's good outcomes. And that requires a substantial amount of evidence. And often great hope is put on very preliminary data, and where do you cut the line between something that is standard of care versus still experimental investigational? And managed care plans have a number of ways of dealing with this. They do look for substantial evidence, but not overwhelming evidence. They want enough evidence to know that this is an advance, that it's going to be effective, and hopefully that it will improve outcomes and ultimately lower costs, because better outcomes do, in the long run, lower cost. And this is particularly true in chronic disease, where we have multiple medications and where we have a very heterogeneous population. So the challenges are great, and I think as we learn more and apply the evidence, we'll have much better and more effective treatments for subpopulations and ultimately for individuals.
That's a great point, because in population health and precision medicine, when those two dynamics sort of come together, we're talking about an increase in complexity. So how do you manage that complexity is a great point. Back to you, Dr. Zein. When we're talking about the Cleveland Clinic, right, you've been leading great work in the space of personalized medicine. And personalized medicine is oftentimes seen as this fine balance in decreasing variations in care when it comes to population health, and at the same time increasing and accounting for increased variability in individualized care when it comes to precision medicine or personalized care. So it's this sort of fine balance. How does this play into areas of your expertise, such as liver disease and gastroenterology?
So before I answer this, I'm gonna just comment quickly about this conflict between science and managed care. I mean, I think I would say, and that leads into your question, is it's potentially actually it's the greatest way for alignment of those two. Ultimately, both managed care and precision medicine may come out with the same outcome, that is ways to take care of a patient in a more efficient, cheaper, and effective way. So I would say probably it had the potential of resolving this lifelong conflict that has existed since medicine probably existed, or since insurance industry have existed. Now back to your question, in my field, I think I'll give you two examples. For the most part, we are still in the stage of data acquisition, data collection. I think these comments have been made throughout the presentations today that, you know, one component is to acquire all this data on population and on large cohorts of patients, another is to make sense out of it and figure out how to use it in an effective way. You know, the number one cause of chronic liver disease, liver cancer, and liver transplant today is fatty liver. And in the last only year or two, we have identified a number of genetic variation in which would help us understand how disease progresses and how potentially environments such as obesity interact with the fatty liver. If you look at the larger population of fatty liver patients, and those are many millions in the US alone, the majority of which will live out their life without any significant medical problem, yet we expose them to lifelong testing, ultrasounds, blood tests, biopsies, and sometimes treatment, in which the treatment may have side effects. We have, you know, we treated a lot of patients with vitamin E and with other products that now we realize it increase overall mortality for other reasons. Understanding this interaction between the genetics and the environment may help us identify those 20% that will benefit from intervention and from follow-up, and will save a lot of money along the way instead of having to follow 100% of patients to follow only 20%. Another example that probably will make its way even sooner than fatty liver would be colon cancer. You know, understanding genetics of colon cancer will probably allow us in the future to do screening colonoscopy to certain targeted individual, not to the whole population of the United States. Unfortunately, I already had mine, so I won't benefit from that. But I think these are two examples in my area in which will probably make difference in the future.
Those are great examples. Thank you very much. Adrian, a question for you. Maybe we can focus a little bit on cancer genomics, which is an area that you're doing a lot of work in, right? I think if you look at Hippocrates, who's attributed as the sort of the founder of modern day medicine, over 2,000 years ago, he said, it's more important to know what sort of a person has a disease than to know what sort of a disease a person actually has, right? So maybe that was sort of the genesis of cancer genomics and precision medicine at large. Can you describe how cancer genomics is progressing and what you're actually seeing and leading in terms of taking some of the specifics of cancer genomics to the next level?
Yeah, so the rapid advances in sequencing has really transformed cancer, because now we can sequence it and we can find the DNA mutations that are the causes of it, and then the mechanisms for resistance to therapy, for example. We've now sequenced thousands and thousands of cancer genomes, and we know, depressingly, that pretty much they're all different. Every cancer is unique at the kind of base pair level, and they're incredibly complex, and they evolve over time. And this is why we do poorly with treatment, in that they're changing consistently, and you need to kind of remap them each time. It's an incredibly exciting time. For example, we've now have this thing called liquid biopsies, where we can actually sequence some of those tumor mutations out of blood. The tumor sheds them into blood, so you can actually just draw the blood, sequence it, and find the tumor mutations. And so you can really track patients now in real time. And we have a couple of publications just out recently doing that in patients, where you can see how their mutations from their tumor actually change by just monitoring it in blood, just like you would monitor tumor antigens. But the challenge, and this actually comes back to this point before, is that the system isn't really set up for this, and that pretty much everyone is unique and an individual, and every tumor is individual, yet we have a kind of healthcare system that's based on the population. And so, how do we approve drugs? We do a randomized controlled trial of 3,000 patients versus 3,000. Well, we don't have 3,000 to do, we have one. And so this comes down to this question of, I think one of the challenges between managed healthcare and precision medicine has been lack of data, because of the lack of interoperability and questions like that. An example of how this is changing, the FDA just had a recent announcement that for drug approval and device approval, it's now going to start to consider what's called real-world evidence or real-world data. That is evidence that comes from cancer registries or databases, hospital databases, for example. So it won't have to necessarily come from a randomized controlled clinical trial. And that's where you will capture, say, for instance, 2% of lung cancer has a specific mutation. It'd be very hard to do a trial in those 2%, but if you captured all of the hospital data together, you might find evidence for benefit.
Sure.
So I think that's, cancer's kind of pushing the way as to true, real individualization down to the N of 1. Yeah. And then that's kind of forcing the system to change and understand how to kind of move forward with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So recognizing that we're standing between lunch and a really engaging dialogue, maybe I'll end this with two quick questions for the panelists on both sides of me. So let's talk about money, because I think that's really important. We're talking about cancer genomics, we're talking about precision medicine, but as a managed care company, who will be asked to pay for the genetic and molecular testing used in precision medicine, and who will be advising the employer groups and customers about whether to include them as covered benefits?
Well, that's an excellent question. Certainly managed care plans provide those services, as do a number of consulting firms throughout the country and probably throughout the world. And it's no different here than in any other country that has an organized system of paying for health care. You have to make decisions. Are you going to cover everything for everybody, anytime, anywhere? Or are you going to have a network and cover certain benefits? So it's a large, complex question. And I can't do it justice in the time we have. But certainly look at the evidence, and certainly with the merger of both better testing, more sophistication about both therapeutics and disease, and the interaction between genes and drugs, because there's a significant, in pharmacogenetics, significant interaction. Not everybody responds to, let's say, who has diabetes responds to metformin. You need a metformin receptor. Not everybody with colon cancer responds to certain chemotherapy. You need a certain gene to be in a wild type to respond to a certain chemotherapy. Same in breast cancer. So as we learn more and more, become more nuanced and have more evidence on that, whether it's 2% or 1%, we can make those decisions if the evidence lands that way. So, and I would say BRCA is a great example of that, being a small percentage of breast cancer, but every healthcare insurance company in the country has criteria, as does Medicare, for who would qualify for BRCA testing and who doesn't. And if you're positive, you know, there's certain preventative strategies that would be entailed. So I do think it's an exciting time, and I think the merger of all this high technology, both from IT as well as data, as well as genetic technology, is extremely exciting. Absolutely. It's an amazing time.
And it is becoming real, for sure. So maybe we'll end right after this question with one or two questions from the audience as well, because again, we have such an esteemed group of panelists here. So Dr. Zein, let me end with this question for you, because you were seeing so much come out of the Cleveland Clinic, whether it's in terms of research and obviously clinical best practices. Specific to the area of precision medicine, what other areas of advancements are you seeing and leading at the Cleveland Clinic?
So I'll speak into the larger question, that is, we are like many healthcare systems involved in academic